Lochran, Adam Scher, 9-game baseball slate. We're going to jump into it right now. But hey, before we get started with anything, did you watch the Kentucky Derby, right?
No, I didn't.
You actually didn't watch it, huh?
No, I actually thought it was on Sunday and not Saturday. I was
Okay.
I was like doing DFS stuff on Saturday and then found out through Twitter what happened. I was like, oh, okay, well, it was today.
I really only knew because I had to talk about it on the Sirius show, and my neighbors have a party that I go to. But I was gonna ask you what you thought about the fact that the winner got it stripped. I'm sure you heard about it. Did he won?
Yeah, and I've seen the clip since then. Like, I don't know anything about horse racing rules, but he
No.
clearly cut off another horse, which I guess is a bad thing.
Our boy, well, kind of, he didn't. Our boy Ben Rasa came on though, and he made a good point. He's like, "There's no downside to the guy that objected, so let me just try," and it ended up being right. Or he ended up, getting the benefit of the doubt. It's the first time it's ever happened. I don't really get the appeal for the Derby, but I bet on it just because I would never watch it otherwise. You know what I mean?
I mean, as far as outside of people that are just really into horse racing, I assume the appeal is the same as it is for a lot of things. You get it's an excuse to drink and gamble.
Exactly. That's all it was. There was not. You're right.
I mean,
You're right. That
college,
is
like four different years, my friends and I got up at 7 a.m. to drive to Delaware and watch people launch pumpkins out of cannons because we could just get drunk at 8 a.m. and nobody was going to say anything.
Was that the pumpkin chunkin thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never done that. It seems like a lot of fun. I went to Wing Bowl a couple times. Went to Wing Bowl a couple times though, where like you literally start drinking at 1 a.m. the night before, or like 10 p.m. and then it starts at 5 or 6 a.m. It is just debauchery at its finest. But
yeah, like pumpkin chunking, people can't camp out and stuff, and it's a shit show, but it's fun.
Right. You don't care who wins.
Nah, but like there's like some people that bring their kids and stuff, and like they actually are like into it, and it's like, man, like I kind of feel like a degenerate being around you guys.
Right.
But
yeah, no question. I can promise you this: no one brings their kids to Wing Bowl. All right, let's get started. We'll jump right into it. Baltimore and Boston. One interesting thing: this slate doesn't have a ton of high totals at all. If you're talking about stacks that you feel supremely confident in, there aren't that many of them. Boston, though, has the highest total on the slate at 5.4, going up against John Means here. And then Josh Smith starting for Boston, 4.2 total for Baltimore. I want to ask you before we jump into this game, have you seen anything related to Josh Smith's pitch count?
I think there was a quote from Cora saying he's hoping to get 4 or 5 innings out of Smith.
Okay.
He in his last AAA start, he threw, I think it was 87 pitches. That was on April 20th. So I think he's at least reasonably stretched out for a minimum price tag.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, he's made one appearance this season. He pitched 1 inning a few days ago. But
yeah,
Means is one of those guys, he relies on 2 pitches. The changeup isn't terrible, but guys in this Boston lineup, I mean, you could probably pick one out of a hat and you'd be right. But like Betts and Martinez and Bogarts, they all hit fastballs and changeups well. I get they're going to be relatively popular at their price points. I understand it's the highest total. I do like Boston a lot here at Camden Yards, though. What are you doing here? Unless you want to talk about these pitchers, I'm assuming we can work into the bats here first.
Well, I mean, so as far as the pitching goes, I am using Smith quite a bit as an SP2 just because it lets me get an ace pitcher and, pretty much whatever bats I want.
And he's minimum salary.
But yeah, exactly. It's purely a price play. Like, I have him projected for like 11 points, and that gets him into lineups. As far as Means goes, though, he does have that improved changeup, but the thing about that pitch so far this year is that while it does have a 20+% swinging strike rate against righties, he's also allowed close to a 200 expected ISO on it. So it's a pitch that is getting hit hard when hitters make contact. And you have a lot of right-handed power in this Boston lineup that does not swing and miss very often. In particular, obviously, JD Martinez and Mookie Betts are really good. But going back to the start of the 2017 season against left-handed changeups, JD has a 479 expected WOBA, 417 ISO. Mookie has a 404 expected WOBA with a 270 ISO. So those two really grade out well for me, even on top of how good they are against Means. And then, you have a good Boston lineup too, with Bogarts hitting second, which is nice, with Michael Chavez hitting fourth. You get some value down at the bottom with Steve Pearce and Eduardo Nunez both being 2,200 on FanDuel, 36 and 3,900 on DraftKings. So multiple ways that you can stack this team. A lot of really good hitters in there. And in tournaments, don't even shy away from the lefties, because Means does now have one pitch that gets swings and misses, and it's not a pitch he throws to lefties. So, Jackie Bradley Jr. and Rafael Devers, the only two lefties in the lineup, but they probably will come in at lower ownership than a lot of these right-handed bats, and you can take advantage of that in tournaments as well.
Yeah, I think so too. Michael Chavis has hit really well. He's batting cleanup today. Another thing too, and you had mentioned don't ignore the lefties. I agree with you on that, but the only thing that's a shame is that Christian Vasquez is so damn expensive, because the catcher position is terrible. It doesn't have me shying away from him as much as I normally would above 4K on DraftKings, but I mean, there's no denying how bad, and it's most nights, Adam. I get it. But, this is another night where catcher's really weak. Do you like Vasquez here batting sixth?
I would use the word "like" very loosely.
Well, but in the context, relative to the position.
Yeah, so I mean, as part of a stack, he's really valuable because he correlates you at a weak position. As a one-off, I like him a little bit less because he just doesn't have that kind of power upside. And I think he will be popular because he's batting sixth in the Boston lineup. So, if you're like hand building a lineup and looking for a one-off at catcher, I think I would rather try and get to like a Yasmani Grandal or Robinson Chirinos, really powerful hitters that are in either, worse spots in the batting order or just, a difficult matchup in Grandal's case, but that could come in at lower ownership and are just better hitters than Vasquez.
Yeah. For what it's worth, I don't know how long it'll last, but he's actually hitting for pretty acceptable power this year. 217 ISO. He's got 5 home runs already, 8 extra base hits. So, I mean, among all of the catchers that we've seen for Boston this year and over the last couple of years, Vasquez is at least the most valuable. Not that says a lot, but he has hit for some power this year. 5 home runs is not terrible for a position that is as bleak as this one.
Yeah, and I would say you probably should be playing Vasquez at catcher in cash games.
Probably should be, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you there. It's really ugly. And yes, he's expensive, but it's not egregious either. It's not horrible when he's $200 more than Austin Barnes. $14 on Yahoo, unnecessary on FanDuel. But yeah, Boston bats here just from top to bottom. I love them. I think this poses a really tough matchup for John Means. I know you mentioned that you would definitely have some Josh Smith, but I do want to talk about the Baltimore bats for a moment, because guys like VR on a couple sites are pretty cheap. And Chris Davis, I know it sounds ridiculous because he broke a record with 54 hitless at-bats and was hitless over his first, I think, 36 at-bats or 38 of the season. Over his last 48 plate appearances, right? He has 3 home runs, 11 RBIs, I think 3 doubles, with a 361 WOBA, like a 260 ISO. Granted, small sample, I get it. But Chris Davis actually has not been bad over the past, say, 3 weeks. Excuse me. Go ahead.
Okay. No, I'll say even before he ended that 0 streak, he was hitting a lot of balls hard and just getting robbed. For the season against right-handed pitching, he has a 350 expected WOBA and a 271 expected ISO compared to a 283 actual WOBA and 203 actual ISO. So his expected numbers are better than his season-long numbers anyway, and he has been hitting for power. And then if you go and look at Josh Smith, not a big sample size on him, but since 2016, he's thrown 666 pitches to lefties, only a 6.9% swinging strike percentage. So whenever you get a guy that doesn't miss bats facing Chris Davis at a cheap price point, I like Davis, and that's not an exception today. I expect Smith to have a pretty decent amount of ownership on the 2 pitcher sites. So Davis works out as a leverage play. He's batting 7th at a pretty deep first base position, which should keep his ownership down. I do like Davis quite a bit. And even, beyond Davis as like a cheap mini stack in tournaments, I like the, 5 through 7 with Ruiz, Wilkerson, and Davis.
Yeah, I don't hate it either. By the way, this is, personal opinion, but I don't find the top of the first base position as stacked or appealing as I normally would, which makes it easier for me to say, all right, I'll go down to Davis at a position that, I'm generally looking for very consistent, solid power. In a spot like this, though, there are a couple first basemen that are in pay down spots that I actually like more.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that. A lot of the expensive first basemen are in matchups that are less than ideal because there is so much good pitching on this slate. One thing I will add is that first base, I actually had time to go through and StatCast like every player today and look at pitch type matchups. And first base actually has a ton of guys that do match up really well in terms of pitch type data. So I have more first basemen kind of bumped up than normal.
Okay. And by the way, Jonathan VR is pretty discounted on FanDuel. Second base, he's what, $3,300. I think that's really reasonable. And then on Yahoo, he's 17. Pretty pricey on DraftKings, but on those two sites, you're getting pretty good value on a guy in VR who has either multiple hits or an extra base hit in almost half of his games this year. He hasn't had a monster ceiling, but he has been very consistent, and he has 7 stolen bases. Okay, let's move on. Marcus Stroman, Martin Perez, Toronto, and Minnesota. Run totals here for both sides, 4.4 for Toronto, 4.2 for Minnesota. I want to start by saying, Adam, sometimes we'll have slates where I kind of make the mistake of saying of going against my better judgment. And I feel like I did that last week with Perez against Houston because you and I had both been espousing, all of the big changes that Martin Perez has made, right? He added a cutter. He's throwing it 35% of the time. His velocity's up above 95 miles per hour. He's throwing the sinker less, which is made for more missed bats. He has a double-digit swinging strike rate for the first time in his career. I could go on, but it's unnecessary. You get the point. When it came to last week, there weren't a lot of good stacks, and it was more along the lines. And granted, I think 8 scoreless with 7 Ks against Houston is definitely the exception to the rule. But I kind of allowed myself to ignore all of those significant improvements that he's made because there weren't a lot of good hitters out there or stacks out there. And I was like, no, he can't, he's still got to be somewhat of the Martin Perez that I remember from the past. And Houston's still a really good team. But we saw another really good start from the guy. And I do believe the changes are real, whether or not he has a good start tonight or he doesn't.
I agree. And if you look at his cutter usage to righties, he's actually been upping it over his last couple of starts as well. Threw it 43% of the time 2 starts ago, 51% to righties in his last start. And he's a really, really interesting play to me on 2 pitcher sites tonight because the Toronto bats have they have plenty of right-handed power. They're in a good hitter's park. They're cheap. They're going to have ownership. Right now, they're projected to be one of the highest owned teams on DraftKings. And Perez, that cutter, he has a 15.2% swinging strike rate to righties. He's allowed a 0.09 expected ISO, a 216 expected WOBA. And like I said, he's throwing it even more now to righties. I think it's a spot where he works as a leverage play on a slate where pitching's loaded at the top and you have a good value play in Josh Smith, but mid-range is pretty dead. You have, for me, it's Perez and Chacin are the 2 mid-range pitchers that I like. Chacin right now projected for, I believe, 19% ownership. Perez at 5. I think I'll have a lot more Perez than that just because I think that the changes are for real. Toronto, they don't have a ton of strikeouts in their lineup, but while they have power, they're not, the best hitters overall. And if Perez does go out there and pitch well, you're shutting down a large percentage of, opposing lineups. So I think Perez certainly has value on 2 pitcher sites as an SP2.
So do I. I don't think he's ever going to be like an elite strikeout guy. I just don't see it being the case. But just a ton of improvements. It's funny too. Jose Altuve after the last game said, he said some things about him that were pretty, he said he looked 100% different tonight. And he said the cutter was the key for him tonight, meaning like we talked about, he looks different to batters, no question, as he should. And the cutter has been really good. Also, I was reading up on something, and pitching coach Wes Johnson clearly paying dividends for the guy. And apparently one thing that Wes Johnson does is he tries to get the most velocity out of any pitcher that he works with. And that's been the case from Perez. So look, he's still going to have some bad starts, but I think you're going to see a lot more good starts from Perez from a fantasy perspective than we ever have in the past. And this is not a type of matchup that he can't put decent numbers up against. What are your thoughts on Stroman?
I'm not getting to Stroman.
Me
He
neither.
doesn't strike out enough guys for me. He's facing a Minnesota team that, in addition to having good hitters, they don't strike out a lot either. I respect him a ton as a pitcher. I don't love taking bats against him, but it is worth pointing out too that especially on DraftKings, you have pretty appealing prices on the Minnesota hitters, the top of the order. Max Kepler in particular grades out well for me from a pitch type standpoint. Hits right-handed sliders well, hits right-handed sinkers in Stroman's velocity range well. So I'm getting to a pretty decent amount of Kepler, getting some Rosario and Blanco mixed in as well. And that's kind of just a function of how many good pitchers there are on the slate. On a lot of slates, I wouldn't really be interested at all in taking guys against Stroman. But when you have so many aces, Stroman is, at least someone that's going to let you put the ball in play, and you have reasonable price tags on the Minnesota bats.
Yeah, I agree with you. What about a very cheap Marwin Gonzalez batting sixth today?
Don't think I got to a lot of him. I'm trying to double check it now.
I only ask because he's 3,100 on DraftKings, 2,300 on FanDuel, and on Yahoo he's $10, which is more than I thought, but still not expensive. More so on DraftKings and FanDuel, where he's dirt cheap. Our ownership projections early in the day had Marwin Gonzalez with quite a bit of ownership.
Yeah, so I crunched out 600 lineups on DraftKings as like a dummy crunch, and I got Gonzalez in 5%, which by comparison, it's less than Rosario, it's less than Kepler. So I'm fine using him as a cheap guy, but I would prefer getting to some other guys on the slate.
Yeah,
I have less of him than Jackie Bradley.
30 out of 600 is not exactly a ringing endorsement.
Yeah, and to be fair, that's also like I'm crunching stacks, so
right.
It's not like
Right. No, I got you. Anything else on this one?
So obviously we like Perez, but I do think that Randall Grichuk is cheap. I'm getting a pretty good amount of Grichuk. Teoscar Hernandez, pitch type wise, grades out the best for me from Toronto, so I bumped him a little bit. I expect him to have basically zero ownership batting eighth. So I'm fine taking those one-offs. Guerrero obviously is inexpensive.
All right.
It's just that I think the ownership on Toronto is probably higher than it should be.
So do I, which is a little more reason why I have some interest in Perez. Now, pitching's pretty top heavy tonight, but if I am going down, that would be one of the spots I'm going. Tampa Bay and Arizona, Blake Snell, Merrill Kelly. Snell has had some trouble over his last two starts, both of which came against Kansas City. He didn't make it through 4 innings in either of them. I looked. I didn't see anything glaring. There was he lost a little movement. I can't remember which pitch it was, maybe 2, but it didn't seem like anything glaring there.
Curveball and changeup.
Is that what it was? Okay. What do you make of Snell here against Arizona?
So I'm not really getting to him on DraftKings. I thought I would get more of him when I did the show with Jake this morning than I am once I actually made lineups. I haven't crunched FanDuel yet. I do think that he's more appealing there than he is on DraftKings or Yahoo because you have a bigger price difference between him and the guys at the top. I'm kind of concerned about him, but there's a couple of things. If you look at those last 2 starts, first, he had like a 444 batting average on balls in play and then 417 against in those 2 starts. So he clearly was getting unlucky on balls falling in those starts against Kansas City. But in the most recent start, which was the first one that he made since breaking his toe, his zone percentage was just 33%, which is about 10 to 12 percentage points lower than his season average. He lost some movement on his curveball and his changeup in that start. That's not stuff that's necessarily sticky from start to start. So I'm not saying that like he's broken or anything like that, but it is a little bit concerning to me that in his first start pitching with a broken toe, he was throwing less strikes and he had less movement on his, kind of on his feel pitches, the stuff that, you really just, it's not your fastball where like you're just reaching back and throwing it. His velocity was fine, but I'm a little concerned about that kind of stuff. And then you pair it with the fact that there are, a million aces to go to, and I'm just not really getting to him on the 2 pitcher sites. But again, on FanDuel, I think I'll get a bit more just because you have a huge price difference between him and guys like DeGrom.
Yeah, exactly. There's not enough on DraftKings. And on Yahoo, it's hard to say there's enough either. He's 54. Garrett Cole's 56. DeGrom 57. Scherzer 58. It's a little bit more difficult to get there. He's still a phenomenal pitcher, but it's much more difficult for me to land there. Merrill Kelly hasn't been bad this year, actually. The one thing about him, though, is he's just not a guy that I do think he does a good job of limiting runs and might continue to do that. Gets a decent amount of ground balls, doesn't give up a ton of hard contact, but he also doesn't miss a lot of bats. What do you make of this matchup for Kelly and for the Tampa Bay hitters?
Yeah, he's basically Miles Michaelis to me, where he does a good job limiting damage. He locates well, but he doesn't miss a ton of bats. And the price tags on Tampa Bay are pretty appealing. So I'm getting them as like my 5th or 6th stack right now. Tommy Pham at 4,500 is one of the cheapest price tags we've had on him in a while. Nate Lowe at 3,600 is really cheap. G-Man Choi has some power. Obviously, the ballpark sucks, and that is probably part of the reason that Tampa Bay is priced down. But on a slate where there's so many good pitchers, Merrill Kelly's not one that I'm really hesitant to pick on. So not my favorite stack because of the ballpark and because Kelly has been pretty decent this year, but still getting to some Tampa Bay stacks here.
Okay. Yeah, look, Merrill Kelly, I have enough respect for him, but not enough to play him here, and I don't think there's enough upside either, especially given a couple cheaper pitchers that I like more and are actually less expensive. So both sides I'm not in love with. I mean, like if you were to go with a guy like Choi, you mentioned Nate Lowe, it's fine, but I'm not huge on these guys. What about? Well, I guess that's kind of it for this game, right? I don't have much interest in Arizona hitters, even though Snell has been a little rough around the edges the past couple of starts. It doesn't have me chomping at the bit to load up on Diamondbacks bats. What about you?
Yeah, I'm not getting to Arizona either. They're priced down a little bit for the park and the matchup, but not enough for me to get them in lineups.
All right. Milwaukee, Washington. Max Scherzer, Jhoulys Chacin. So I tweeted this out earlier today, and I just find it interesting, but not surprising. Max Scherzer leads all starting pitchers in K-minus BB rate, 29.1%, xFIP, and Sierra, but only Brandon Woodruff has a higher BABIP than Scherzer this season. So best xFIP, best Sierra, best K-minus BB, second worst BABIP, 377 among all starting pitchers. Look, there's nothing whatsoever wrong with Max Scherzer. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is also a terrifying matchup for him, going against a ton of left-handed power for Milwaukee in a park that plays up left-handed power. And these are all good fastball hitters too. I was talking about it in Slack. Obviously, Scherzer's fastball is different than just about anyone else's fastball. So being a good fastball hitter doesn't mean that you have the advantage against Max Scherzer, but it makes it a scarier matchup when you have a team full of left-handed power hitters that have shown the ability to hit 95 plus mile an hour fastballs as opposed to a team that doesn't. So that's the case here with guys like Yelich and Shaw and Thames, Moustakas. Like these guys all, Grandal, they all have power from the left side. And it scares me a little bit. I mean, so far this season, Scherzer's allowed a 233 expected ISO to lefties. Going back to last year, 139, we saw him do better last year at limiting power to lefties. But he also was throwing his cutter like 17% of the time last year. This year, he's cut it back to about 10%. His fastball is getting hit pretty hard. His curveball is getting hit hard. His changeup's getting hit, reasonably hard as well. And so that is concerning here. I think that Scherzer is cheaper than he should be. He's just more talented than a $10,000 pitcher or 10.5 on FanDuel. But it is a scary matchup, and I don't mind getting to some of these Milwaukee bats because they are really cheap. The catching position is really bad. Grandal's one of the best hitting catchers in baseball at a sub 4K price tag on DraftKings. Travis Shaw is $3,000. So I don't mind getting to some Milwaukee bats here and just hoping to get a home run or two off of Scherzer.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. But while it is a scary matchup, it's still a matchup that does have some strikeouts in it. And as far as Scherzer goes, like this is, I don't think I could be wrong. Outside of a Coors Field matchup, I don't think we see Scherzer this cheap again this season.
I
I don't.
agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, 10K flat on DraftKings is pretty outrageous. 10-5 on FanDuel. So yes, this is a scary spot, but I'm not shying away entirely just because it's a tough matchup. The only thing though that I don't like, and I honestly thought this would be a little bit different given the amount of good pitchers up top, is right now we have Cole and DeGrom on DraftKings at 35 and 33% projected ownership, and Scherzer at 28. So people are buying, well, expectedly going to buy into that price point and aren't shying away from the matchup, aren't shying away from some spotty results.
Right, and that's the problem that I'm having right now is that I have DeGrom and Cole projected for 3 to 4 points more than Scherzer. Cole obviously is more expensive, but DeGrom is basically the same price point. And I think he's a better pitcher than Scherzer. I think he's in a better matchup than Scherzer. And as long as we have them projected for similar ownership, I'm going to end up just getting a lot of DeGrom.
All right. What do you think of a guy like Chessin? Washington was stuck on the runway for 7 hours yesterday. They couldn't get they had engine trouble. They ended up going back to the hotel in Philly. They're down so many hitters right now. It's insane. I mean, Soto, Adams, Zimmerman, Turner, Rendon, who should be eligible to return tomorrow. What are your thoughts if you're going cheap on a guy like Chessin, or has he just been brutal enough to where you would want to go nowhere near him? He is striking righties out at 29% this year. There's 6 of them in the lineup today. And the last thing I'll say, the only reason I would even talk about this is because the Nationals have a 3.8 implied total at Miller Park.
Yeah, I mean, I like Chessin. I think that he probably will be the most popular of the mid-range pitchers. Right now, I think we have him projected for 19 or 20%. So I'm fine getting there. Like right now, I was getting him as him and Perez both in like 20 to 25% range. There's 6 righties in the lineup, including the pitcher. The lefties don't really have power with guys like Stevenson and Wilmer Defoe. Chessin has always been very, very good against righties, gets a lot of swings and misses on that slider. So, yeah, I think he'll be popular, and rostering guys like Chessin when they're popular isn't really the most fun, but I do think it's a good spot, and I have no issues getting to him.
Okay. Any interest in Washington hitters?
Nope.
All right. Chicago Cubs, Miami Marlins. Cole Hamels, his best start of the season came against Miami. 7 3-hit scoreless innings, 8 strikeouts. He's been good this season. Unspectacular, but good. And Sandy Alcantara on the other side. What do you make of Cole Hamels here on a night where the lowest total by a wide margin is the Miami Marlins, 2.7?
Yeah, Hamels one of my highest owned pitchers, regardless of site. I think he's affordable on all sites. It's a good matchup as far as not a lot of right-handed power. The weather is very good for pitching in Chicago tonight, and despite it being a right-handed heavy lineup, that's not really a concern for me either, because Hamels has that changeup that gets a ton of swings and misses. 28.5% swinging strike percentage on his changeup to righties so far this year. He's just a good pitcher. He had the bad year a couple of years ago, but he turned things around last year, and he's been fine so far this year. 313 expected WOBA, 126 expected ISO to righties with an 11.5% swinging strike percentage, and just not a lot of good right-handed hitters in this lineup. The only thing that really would concern me is that I think he will be really popular because of that Vegas total, and it's going to just draw a ton of attention to him. You could make an argument for pivoting to someone like Chris Paddock at a similar price point, but for me, I'm just going to get to a ton of Hamels here.
Okay, yeah, it's hard not to like him, and he's been good. I still think Hamels' prime is behind him. His best days are behind him, but Miami's so bad that it doesn't matter. By the way, Manny Laura and I were doing also a radio yesterday, and he had mentioned during one of the breaks that it's amazing to think the Marlins had all at the same time: Realmuto, Stanton, Ozuna, Dietrich. Who else am I missing? D. Gordon, if you want to throw him in there. They could have had Syndergaard and decided to take some other scrub. They Jose Fernandez, RIP. It's just like a crazy amount of really talented players, and they're all gone.
Yeah, and they also traded away Domingo Herman, Chris Paddock, uh, someone else like before they even got to the majors.
Was the Domingo Herman thing? Was that true? Did that happen?
Yeah, it was for Evaldi, I think.
Wow, that's so crazy. And like never made the not like never made it. They never made the playoffs with those guys.
Luis Castillo was the other one. They traded him for Dan
Luis
Straley.
Castillo. Yep, that's it. That's it.
Yep.
Oh man. All right. Anyway, what do you think of hitters here? Or if you want to talk about Alcantara, we can do that too.
I don't really have a lot. Obviously, not getting to Miami, but brutal hitting conditions for Chicago as well. I'm not getting to a lot of Alcantara because I don't think there's a ton of strikeout upside here. I have, as far as SP2s, I have less Alcantara than Chacin, Perez, and Josh Smith. And then it's Alcantara for me. I do like Anthony Rizzo and Kyle Schwarber from a pitch type standpoint. Both of them have power. Both of them match up really well with all the stuff that Alcantara throws. Hard fastballs, hard sinkers, and then his off-speed stuff. The problem is that Schwarber's batting eighth with a pitcher behind him, and Rizzo is $5,200 on DraftKings. So it's kind of tough to get there, especially in this hitting weather. So not getting to a ton of either side.
All right. So St. Louis hosts the Philadelphia Phillies, and you have Miles Mikolas on the mound, Vince Velasquez on the mound, neither of whom have been all that impressive. I wasn't last year. I'm not a firm believer in Miles Mikolas. That hasn't changed this year, and he's actually just been blasted by left-handed pitching. A lot of power allowed. Before we get into hitters here, what are your thoughts on Velasquez and/or Mikolas?
I have basically no interest in pitching here. Mikolas just doesn't get enough strikeouts for me, and it's a tough spot against Philadelphia. Velasquez, I think, has one of the worst matchups as far as pitch types go. He throws, a 95-mile-an-hour fastball 65% of the time, and he's facing this lineup full of very, very good fastball hitters for the Cardinals. It's not like he's limited power to righties or anything like that. I think it's a really dangerous spot for Velasquez.
So do I. Very dangerous. And while he's definitely going to have ownership, I still think one of your best value bats on the entire slate is Matt Carpenter.
Yeah, no question about that. I love the Cardinals are one of my top stacks overall, but Carpenter, 3,200 on FanDuel, 38 on DraftKings, and I think like 14 on Yahoo. He hasn't been hitting well, but it's not like we don't have a track record on this guy of being one of the better hitters in baseball. So he's going to get back to it eventually. And as long as he's priced down, there's no reason not to be going to him.
Right. And he's a very good fastball hitter. Yep. Velasquez is throwing fastballs like 70% of the time to lefties this season, something outrageous. I think on the other side, though, Adam, I really like Bryce Harper, and he has struggled lately, man. He has labored it. If this matchup doesn't remedy his troubles, I don't know what will. But you're talking about a guy in Mikolas who has an 8% swinging strike rate against lefties, a 275 expected ISO, 269 actual ISO. He's allowed 5 home runs to him already. I mean, if there was ever a good spot where Harper doesn't get bit by the strikeouts, it's this one against Mikolas.
Yeah, I really like Harper. It's kind of the same thing that I said with Carpenter, where he hasn't been hitting well, but it's still Bryce Harper. And
right.
As long as we're not being asked to pay like $5,700 price tags for him, he's priced for his performance this season and not for the type of hitter he is and the type of hitter that he will be by the end of this season. It's a great matchup against Mikolas. It should be reasonably warm and humid in St. Louis. They have some storms rolling in after the game. That's a part of the country that gets very, very humid and the ball will fly. So I like the hitting conditions. I like the matchup for Harper. He's one of my favorite hitters on the slate.
All right. Achilles asking on DraftKings, given the makeup of today's slate, do you prefer Carpenter at third base or first base on draft? I really think it depends on what you're doing. Like,
it depends.
If you're stacking a team where you want their first baseman, then yeah. If not, and you want to fill third base up, then sure. But I wouldn't look at it as black and white. What do you want to go ahead,
Yeah,
Adam?
I mean, if you're stacking the Cardinals, he's probably better at third base because you have Goldie.
Right, exactly. Um, and if you're stacking a team like Boston, well, I guess what Pierce is first base and outfield eligible, so a lot of things you can do. But yeah, I don't think it's concrete one way or the other. Any other interest in Philadelphia bats outside of Harper? He's the 18th highest priced outfielder on DraftKings, by the way.
Yeah, I'm getting to a lot of JT Realmuto at catcher, one of my highest owned guys there. I'm getting to a pretty good amount of McCutchen in the outfield too, just reasonably priced. Obviously, prefer lefties against Michaelis, but I like the price tag on McCutchen. I like the matchup for Rhys Hoskins. The problem is just he's really, really expensive, so probably not getting to a lot of him outside of Philadelphia stacks. But it is a team that I think has a lot of upside against Michaelis.
All right. So we've got 3 games to go, and we'll do so right now. But before we do, I want to let you know that the promo code to get 50% off your first month at awesomeo.com is Deeper Dive, one word. Deeper Dive, all one word. We have the ownership projections as we've referenced today and all the time, player projections, lengthy, comprehensive articles. Of course, everything from Alex Baker, Awesomeo himself, his projections and rankings, the lineup builder, Fantasy Cruncher add-on, Fantasy Cruncher Pro now, very cool, and content for really any sport that has DFS. Ben Rasa holding it down for PGA and all of our other wonderful niche sports. So you want to check it out. We'd love to have you. And the promo code is Deeper Dive. One word, Deeper Dive. You can put that in upon checking out when you click sign up at the top left of the homepage. And say hi to us in our premium Slack chat when you do. All right, Adam. Houston, Kansas City, Jake Junis, Garrett Cole. Right now, Garrett Cole projected to have the highest ownership, but it's not that spread out, at least not on DraftKings. 35% to 33 for DeGrom, to 28 for Scherzer. On FanDuel, he was projected to have the highest among all pitchers at 27. That is more spread out than others. Scherzer down at 21, Hamels at 18, and of course DeGrom at 16. What are you thinking here as it relates to Garrett Cole? Obviously a very exploitable matchup against the Royals.
He's my second highest projected pitcher on the slate. Coming in probably is like my fourth highest owned behind because of price tag behind DeGrom, Hamels, and then one of the SP2 options. It's a perfectly fine spot. I just have trouble paying more money for Cole than for guys, all the talented pitchers around him, even if it's only a little bit more. Not a lot that I'm concerned about, in the Kansas City lineup. There's plenty of strikeouts there. He could get in some trouble because of how much speed Kansas City has. If they actually are able to get on base, like they're going to be able to run on Cole, and it can lead to him, giving up a couple of pretty unlucky earned runs potentially. But that's not a huge deal because more often than not, they're just not going to get on base against him.
Right. All right. Yeah, the very high ownership, but look, a couple of things about Garrett Cole. I think it's justified. He leads all starters with a 37.6% K rate this season, 16.2% swinging strikes. The numbers are fantastic. Outside contact rate's 46%, 67% contact rate all overall. Like, he's just done an excellent job of missing bats. He's got double-digit strikeouts in 4 of 7 starts. So the ceiling is absolutely there. Would blame nobody for going to Cole in cash or heavily in tournaments either. What do you think of Junis and the Houston bats on the other side of this game?
Yeah, Houston's one of my favorite stacks. They're a top 3 stack for me. Junis, I have respect for him. He has a good slider that gets a lot of swings and misses. He uses it to get strikeouts. The problem is that he's someone who tends to either get strikeouts or give up power. That hasn't been the case quite as much so far this season, but going back to previous seasons, he's really had home run issues with righties. And it's a Houston lineup that has a lot of guys that don't strike out very easily. And then also something that I found interesting was if you go to Baseball Savant and you search for batters' stats against certain pitch types, you can pull up their spray chart and overlay it onto the stadium that they're hitting in. And while Houston hitters don't have great numbers against right-handed sliders for the most part, if you look at their spray charts and overlay it on Houston, where they have the Crawford boxes in left field, pretty much this entire lineup just adds a ton of home runs that were either doubles or out, flyouts or whatever when they hit them in their actual games. But if they hit them in Houston, they would have been home runs. I think it's a really scary spot for Junis. Wouldn't be surprising to see a couple of just kind of like fluke home runs from Houston on just fly balls to left field. But it makes me really like them, combined with the fact that Kansas City doesn't have a good bullpen. I think Houston is one of the top stacks.
Yeah, so do I. They right now have, I believe, the second highest total if everything has stayed the same. Yeah, 5.1. Look, Junis isn't bad. It's just he's the type of guy that can give up home runs in bunches, and we've seen it happen plenty of times before. And I think, against this Houston team, that could certainly happen. And good information you had there with Houston hitting at home at Minute Maid Park. So I obviously like this team quite a bit. They are actually, in some spots, reasonably priced. Jose Altuve's 4,400 on DraftKings, right? On FanDuel, you have to get down to, what is he priced at, 3,900? It's really not bad at all for some of these guys. $19 on Yahoo. So Altuve being one of them, Reddick, Brantley. Who are your preferred bats here? And of course, Chirinos at a bad position. But who do you like most out of this Astros team, or who do you have the most of in your stacks?
So as far as who I like the most, it's Bregman and Brantley, and then Altuve, obviously, because of his price. So those three are the ones that I like the most. But then mixing in, basically everyone else, I'm perfectly fine with.
Okay. Dodgers, Atlanta. Kevin Gausman, Walker Buehler. What do you make of this pitching matchup? It's one that I didn't find myself getting to at all on really either side.
Yeah, I don't see myself really getting to the pitching here. Gausman, obviously, I like some stuff that he's doing since going to Atlanta, but taking him against the Dodgers at a price point that is not depressed isn't something that I really see myself doing. And then Buehler, on some slates, he's a pitcher we really like, but on this one, I have him behind Hamels. I have him behind Chris Paddock at a similar price point. I have him behind all of the aces that are more expensive than him. So I'm not really getting there either. I think that most of my ownership in this game will be going to Dodgers bats. It's not the most appealing matchup against Gausman, but they are reasonably priced. And we talk a lot about just being able to get so much talent upside into your lineups at reduced price tags. Max Muncy at 4,300 on DraftKings, I think is a really good play. Bellinger, if he's in the lineup, is expensive, but is a strong play. Corey Seager's cheap. There's just a lot of cheap upside on this team, and because of how many expensive pitchers there are that I want to get exposure to, I'm getting to Dodgers bats just because of how talented they are.
Right, I think so too. You mentioned a couple, but yeah, I mean, when you're looking at, I'll tell you what, this is probably the cheapest we're going to see somebody like Corey Seager all season. Yep. I don't think you get him much cheaper than this. I understand that he hasn't been great, but there's a lot of power here. Gausman's no stranger to giving up home runs either. He is striking lefties out at a high rate. He has a good splitter, but overall, this is one of those slates where looking at the teams, like you have 8 teams with run totals of 3.8 or lower, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 under 4.5. So that's not among, you have nine games, 18 teams, and 14 of them are 4.4 or lower. So only a couple teams that really stand out as like strong options. And I think we've talked about 3 of them already in Boston, Houston, and St. Louis.
Right. Yeah. And so, I mean, it's not that I love the Dodgers. It's just that I like their price tags and spot better than most others.
Right. Exactly. Do you want to talk about Atlanta at all?
I have basically nothing from Atlanta. Josh Donaldson graded out pretty well on from a pitch type standpoint, but it's still not like I can prioritize him over guys like Carpenter or Bregman.
Okay. Let's close it out then. New York Mets, San Diego. My assumption here, Garrett Cole being your second highest projected pitcher. Jacob deGrom takes top honors tonight here against the Padres.
Yep. Yeah, tons of righties. Best pitcher in baseball at the moment in DeGrom. There's really just nothing for me not to like here. He should be like he's 10-2 on DraftKings. He's 57 on Yahoo. Those are both very affordable. And then 11-1 on FanDuel is, a little bit more appropriate, but with how soft the hitter pricing is on FanDuel, it's still not like it's difficult to get to DeGrom. So yeah, tons of strikeouts here, tons of right-handed batters. I really just don't have a reason not to roster DeGrom, especially if in our final ownership update, DeGrom is still expected to basically be splitting ownership with guys like Scherzer and Cole.
What is your thinking on Chris Paddock?
I'm not getting to a lot of him just because of how many good pitchers there are. If I were like hand building a lineup if you're hand building a lineup and you think that a reasonable stand is to take Chris Paddock at lower ownership than Cole Hamels, I wouldn't talk you off of that. I think it's perfectly reasonable. I don't have them projected close enough that I'm getting there,
right?
But Paddock does have upside in this spot. He has one of the best changeups in baseball. He's facing a bunch of lefties that he should be able to get swings and misses against. So from an ownership standpoint, I think that you could certainly make the argument to get the Paddock. It's just that that's not where I'm going.
Right. Not finding it necessary. Yeah. Okay. So, and I'm with you. Do you have any interest in New York Mets hitters here? Because if there's one thing about Paddock, even if you're not rostering him, you have to at least acknowledge the fact that he allowed 2 home runs against Cincinnati. It was his 4th start of the year. Those are the only home runs he has allowed all season. He has done a very solid job of keeping balls in the yard.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much all that I'm getting to at all is Robinson Cano at really cheap price tags. But even that, I have plenty of second basemen ahead of him.
Okay. All right, Adam. Well, let's go ahead and give our top stacks here. We have pretty much discussed. I just gave you my top 3: Boston, Houston, St. Louis. Do you want to add on, or do you want to draw any differences from mine?
Those are my top 3 as well. I would add Dodgers, Tampa, Philadelphia as other stacks that I'm getting a decent amount of.
Okay, and top pitching. Because we have a couple of minutes here, probably won't run it all the way up till 6, but we have a few minutes. And of course, live before lock coming up next. They're going to take you up till 7:05 lock. When you have guys like Cole, Scherzer, DeGrom, Snell, Buehler, Paddock, and Hamels, so what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 guys above 9K on DraftKings. On Yahoo, sponsor of the Deeper Dive, you have 1, 2, 3, 5 above 54 or at or above 54. Who are you differentiating as just far and away the guys you like most? I know it's DeGrom and Hamels. Is there anybody else, though, that you see yourself getting a good amount of in those price range?
It's those guys across the board. I will say that on FanDuel, I think I get a decent amount of Blake Snell because he is reasonably priced. On Yahoo and DraftKings both, you have Martin Perez at nice price tags. Getting a lot of Chacin as a mid-range guy too.
All right. Anything else?
There was...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, there was... me and Jake mentioned this morning, there were one on Yahoo specifically, Sandy Alcantara at $27. I think it's a pretty decent play just because he's more talented than a basically minimum pricing.
All right. And the cheaper pitchers, you mentioned Alcantara on DraftKings, on Yahoo. And we mentioned a few other pitchers today, from Martin Perez to Josh Smith, who they expect to get 12 to 15 outs. We talked about Ulyss Chassin, and that's pretty much that. I'm catching an echo here. I don't know if it's on your side or mine. But what cheap pitchers do you like the most here?
Chassin, Perez, and Smith are really the only 3 I'm getting any sort of value.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that. Anything else to add before we head out?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Hey, before you guys head out, it's greatly appreciated. Hit us with a thumbs up. If you like the video, you appreciate the content. If you could like it, because it really helps us a lot, and we appreciate it too. Subscribe and hit the notification bell too, so you always know when our content's dropping next. And you can check it out on Twitter at @awesemo_com. Follow me and or Adam and myself at Twitter with the handles under our heads. And until next time, we wish you good luck. Live Before Lock coming up next, and we'll be back with you tomorrow. A much bigger slate on the Deeper Dive. Good luck tonight.
Good luck.